Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Slay the Spire, the board game. So, this game by Contention Games is a spin off of the video game Slay the Spire, of course. And I will say that I have played the video game once. I was able to play it with a friend a couple of years ago, actually. This game is very popular, and when they made the board game version of it, I admit I felt like this was kind of a moot project because the game is so much, I guess, faster online. But the caveat is here you can play it solo, but you can also play it up to four people, and so this is a more cooperative experience with your friends that you play with, at the expense of doing some bookkeeping manually, as you would in a board game. I'm not going to go over the game too much, but as an overview, you are deck building and playing a roguelite type of experience where you progress along this randomized map, having encounters with enemies, as is pictured here, stopping to rest and heal, gaining events along the way, doing events, gaining gold and spending them for additional potions or treasures and cards as resources. And this is primarily a deck building game where you start the game with 10 basic cards. And let's see if I can spread these guys out so you can see them. So you start with like 10 basic cards, and they each have an energy cost. You enter combat with a certain amount of energy each turn. But you're doing things like putting up shields to block the attacks of your opponents, attacking them too, and taking down their health. But you play as one of four asymmetric characters that have their own specific cards to their playing abilities. And for example, I am in this game playing as the I forgot what they're called, but anyway, they toggle between these states of neutral, calm, and wrath state. I get extra actions for potential damage, or extra strength on my attacks for damage, and then I can gain extra energy when I leave the calm to play more cards from my hand in a given turn. Now, the really cool thing about this, instead of like a market of cards that you choose from in games comparable to other deck builders like Dominion or Clank, Dune Imperium, etc., is that you have your own personal reward deck. And whenever you slay, some minions, and the rewards tell you to upgrade your cards, you will flip over a couple of cards and choose one to put into your deck. Now, you have certain opportunities to get cards from your rare deck, which have really cool effects. They're very strong too. So you have the option to really customize the deck that you have, and it makes the deck that you choose to play with different every time you do so. And the goal of the game is to play through 3 different acts where you move all the way up this map to face the final boss. Then you switch out to the next act, so on and so forth. And if anyone dies, the game is over. So that's kind of the mechanisms as a whole. Now, to compare this game to others that I've played before, obviously there are the deck building games that I mentioned before, but this is a very much cooperative, combat-centric game that is very reminiscent to me of Gloomhaven, which is probably the number one board game, cooperative dungeon crawl, combat, card-driven type of game. In comparison to this, Gloomhaven is more complex. It is longer. A play session can be longer. In this one, it's pretty easy to kind of like say, hey, let's stop at Act 1. For example, my brother and cousin and I, we are playing this right now and have stopped right before we hit the final boss, so we will continue soon after. But the complexity is a lot greater in Gloomhaven. That you have the in-between encounters, you have a lot more options to customize and things like that, and so it feels very much more like a role-playing game, whereas Slay the Spire is more mechanical and just focused on the deck building and the combat system here, which is a lot more simplistic. but it does definitely take less time to understand and play Slay the Spire, in my opinion. And a lot of folks, I mean, both games also have a digital version, and so a lot of folks may be familiar only with the digital version of Gloomhaven, but especially I think that is the case for Slay the Spire, since that's where it came from. So another game that this reminded me of was Leviathan Wilds. So this is a game that I played last year with Jacob, where we had the opportunity to play this on Tabletop Simulator. It's very much an open-ended cooperative experience where we can play cards to help each other out. In Gloomhaven, you play cards that could potentially impact others, but I feel like they're usually centric on your own abilities. Whereas in this game, a lot of the cards that I play, like the strikes that the combat that I enter and the strikes that I perform can be targeted at any enemy. They don't necessarily have to be in my row. A lot of cards benefit other people as well, like giving them blocks and defense against the attacks of enemies. And we can use treasures and potions to help each other out as well. And that's how Leviathan Wilds felt as well, where we had asymmetric characters that had drastically different ways to approach the game, but oftentimes we could play cards that would immediately benefit another player, or they would be able to directly use that action to do so. And it was a very open conversation over the table to discuss what we were going to do, who we are targeting, what actions we're about to take next as well. And it was relatively clean and simplistic as well to understand the iconography and how to play the game. So complexity-wise, as well as just the feeling of cooperation, I felt this game, Slay the Spire, was akin to Leviathan Wilds. And then there are other board game comparisons that you can make, but let's talk about what other people have said about this game. So moving on to the peer review, I combined the comments that were made on Board Game Geek and summarized them as follows. So a lot of people felt like this was a very good adaptation of the game. It's pretty easy to port this to an analog experience, I feel. And I think perhaps there were ways that could have been done worse. So I think the adaptation is very faithful, and it reflects the video game very well. The cooperative nature, once again, relating to how I felt with Leviathan Wilds, it's very easy to cooperate with everyone else. It doesn't. I don't feel like it really has a quarterbacking issue. I feel like it's very much in the vein of looking at what you have and saying, "Hey, this is what I've got. Can I help anyone else out with this?" Rather than saying, "You should do this," right? So I thought that was pretty good as well. Lots of replayability. The rewards deck for every character, and every character plays different, and there are 4 characters, but the amount of content for different cards that you can mess around with and create is seemingly endless, and so a lot of people enjoy that. The components are great. It is very smooth. Not only is the deck building pretty straightforward, but the combat is pretty straightforward as well, and so I felt like it wasn't too complex, and this is like, it felt a lot easier to teach and explain and to execute than, say, Gloomhaven, especially when you play Gloomhaven on the table physically. It's really rewarding. A lot of people compare this to games like Mage Knight, where you go into an encounter, you get to add to your deck, right? You get a treasure card or a potion or something like that with ongoing effects. There are lots of different ways to experience rewards in this game, and so it feels very giving, and a lot of people enjoyed that, and I did too. The bookkeeping, for some, they recognize that it is a lot more tedious in the video game, obviously, but it probably was reduced to the most minimal amount possible to make this game still flow pretty well. And so, people who liked Spirit Island, Mage Knight, liked this game as well. It's definitely less complex than those games. But anyway, the cons for this game include like a long playing time. It is very long. My one experience, these are first impressions as well. And so I did play this on Tabletop Simulator, and the experience was long. We almost got to the first boss, and it took about 2 hours to get there. So with the tabletop simulator experience adding, I don't know, maybe another 15 to 30 minutes extra, it's still like an hour and a half to get through one act, right? And the game's complete after 3 acts. So I think if we were a lot faster and more familiar with our characters, with what cards we have, I think that playtime would go down, but it still felt pretty long. And, some people will say that the bookkeeping is clunky, for example, with HP tracking, but this could be applied to anything else as well. The decision making, I think, the decisions are pretty straightforward. I think for a video game, it is very appropriate and very welcoming to a wider audience for those who aren't familiar with board game mechanisms like deck building and want to experience something that is easily digestible, I would say. I feel like the decisions here are a lot along the lines of Clank when it comes to the amount of decisions and complexity that comes with the cards that you purchase from and what you can do from turn to turn. In this game, a majority of your actions are going to be either to attack or to defend, and some characters have cards that make it different either way, or they interact with their particular powers, but it essentially comes back to attacking and defense. And so there aren't any other ways that this game is exploring, like take Dune Imperium, for example, a deck building game that offers obviously more mechanisms like worker placement, but different avenues of pursuing points in that game. And so, it doesn't, it's very straightforward in Slay the Spire. And so the decisions are, I felt pretty easy. I felt like I was able to understand what I needed to do, and I felt like there was a lot of internal downtime, essentially, as I waited for all of us to resolve our effects and to move on. It was easy to understand what cards I wanted to choose from my rewards deck whenever those options came up to modify my deck. It's the hardest decision I feel like was at the merchant, where deciding whether to cull or trim my deck down versus add more interesting cards or potions to my deck. That was a cool opportunity there, but that only happens once or twice an act. And so the physical version for some is very tedious, and for the reasons mentioned above, the preference for the video game is preferable, right? So my first impressions of this game, just going straight into it, is a 6.3 out of 10. Now, this Slay the Spire, and part of the reason why I wanted to make this video is because Slay the Spire is in the top 100 games of all time already, with an average score of like 8.7. And so that really speaks to the, fan base of those who really enjoy the game. For example, my brother had played the video game a lot, and so did my cousin too, but they really sang the praises, and this really motivated them when they found out this was a board game to want to experience it. We're going to keep playing it, and I will say that I would rather play Slay the Spire than a game like Gloomhaven, which is longer and more complex for something that I am not immediately interested in, where, in comparison to other games that I would rather play. If you know my channel and my taste in games, it's a lot more Euro style and quicker paced as well. A really good Euro style puzzle to solve in about 1 to 2 hours is my optimal experience, and this one was 2+ hours of a lighter experience, which I didn't find as satisfying. It was fun, but and I think this really also speaks to the effect that this game has on folks that want to play it with others. Right, it's a great game that you can play by yourself as a video game, but the opportunity to share this with others around a table is awesome, and the adaptation is great. But I felt like, the theme itself was fine. There's no story, and so it's hard to compare. For me personally, when I want a thematic game, I want to see connections between the cards and the mechanisms and the story, if there is one, or the setting. And so it's a pretty straightforward dungeon kind of crawl experience without much flair or flavor. There's no story to back this up as well. And so, it took some hits for that. The game length is a lot longer than I would want to have in a night of gaming, and so that took some hits as well. It's not the most strategic game, but that may change as I might experience this game at a higher difficulty level. And so for now, it's a 6.3 out of 10. It could probably add a few points for maybe strategic depth as the game continues to increase in complexity, whether in this particular run that I'm going through right now, or in the future if we add more difficulty. But it doesn't have the same depth as other cooperative games like Gloomhaven, but also like Spirit Island, which I would rather play, and other games like that, right? Or a more competitive experience. I feel like with cooperative games, I often feel like I can sometimes I don't feel like I'm contributing a lot to the experience, and and so sometimes I feel like if I'm not worried about my own score in comparison to someone else, I'm not as invested in making the best decisions, right? I'm not min-maxing my experience enough, and so I really enjoy finding the nooks and crannies to make a competitive game as min-maxed as possible, and enjoy diving into the complexities and the different nuances that strategy offers in those games. But in this game, I felt like I could easily choose something that would have a beneficial effect, and it just didn't take a lot of time to come to my own conclusions, and I just was kind of in a repetitive motion, despite the interesting flavors that I would get from the rewards deck to add to my experience, right? That was still fun, but it just wasn't deep enough for me to really enjoy and recommend to those who have similar taste as me. But I think if you do enjoy the video game, and you want a very faithful adaptation, then this game, and want to share that with other people at the same time, I think this game would be definitely up your alley. So take my unpopular opinion with a grain of salt if that is the case, but maybe you agree with me. Let me know in the comments below. But thank you for consulting with me today. I hope you schedule an appointment with me real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.